Through Fire and Water, the life of Reb Noson of Breslov, Chapter 9, Rabbi Yishmael versus Rabbi Shimon. Because of his great desire to be with the Rebbe, Reb Noson began to think about moving to Breslov. He anyway had to start his own life in his own home. However, the Rebbe did not approve. He fully understood Reb Noson's desire to be with him in order to learn how to serve God. But to ascend the spiritual ladder, one must face and overcome obstacles, so as to become Baki Baratzoi and Baki B'Shoiv. The very obstacles themselves increase one's desire to climb higher. If Reb Noson were to move to Breslov and be with the Rebbe constantly, he would not be able to develop the vessel he needed in order to receive from him. It was customary for the Breslov Chassidim to gather with the Rebbe for Shavuos. Reb Noson also came for his first Shavuos that May. The Rebbe, however, understood the limitations of his family's patience. After all, Reb Noson had only recently spent a couple of months with the Rebbe in Medvedevka and sent him back to Nemirov before Shavuos. But before doing so, he spoke to him very warmly. Reb Noson writes, "I had the feeling that the Rebbe was a little upset about my hovering at his gates rather too much. I had just paid him several visits in rapid succession. This time, I found him in his room next to the Beis Medrash. As soon as I came in, he greeted me by saying hello and goodbye, and he smiled. He remained seated and then started comforting me greatly, saying, 'How do you know what God wants to make of you? Today you are this, and later on you will be.' He hinted to me that I would be in very great danger numerous times, and almost. But I will open up the paths of the mind to you, and you will travel the paths of all my lessons, like one who goes touring through the most wondrous, awesome palaces." He said that studying his lessons is like going into a palace containing all kinds of halls and chambers, colonnades and gateways of awesome wonder and beauty, with story upon story, all different, all original, all unique. As soon as someone enters one of the chambers and starts looking around, marveling at its extraordinary originality and uniqueness, he suddenly sees that an amazing gateway has opened up, leading to another chamber, and from there to yet another, and so from chamber to chamber and from story to story. From each place, entrances and windows open out onto the next one, and everything is connected to everything else with the most wonderful ingenuity, the profoundest wisdom, and the most exquisite beauty. But it's impossible to explain any of this to someone without at least a little understanding of the depths of the Rebbe's teachings. Happy are those who have had the merit of tasting the incomparable sweetness and depths of his teachings. Even so, the Rebbe continued, it is still not yours. You are like a mere visitor to something that belongs to someone else. What I want is that it should become all yours, and so it will be. You think it's because of your good deeds. No, it is only because I want it so. The Rebbe then told me a story of one great tzaddik who many times thought to himself, even if I end up as dust under the feet of the tzaddikim, as Chazal say about the souls of the wicked, even so, nothing I won't be. The Rebbe said this to encourage me. Even this great tzaddik became downhearted time after time. He reached the point where he thought there was no more hope, but he revived himself with the thought that at least he would never come to absolutely nothing. If Chazal say that the wicked would become dust, at least this dust is something. This is also good, for nothing I won't be. From what the Rebbe said, it was evident that there were many times when this was how he encouraged himself as well. He was content to serve God each day to the best of his ability, even if it only came to this. He trusted that God and his goodness would treat him well. During the summer of 1803, having seen his son's diligence in his Torah study, prayer, and devotions, Reb Naftali Hertz began to make peace overtures to Reb Noson and agreed to return his dowry money. At the same time, he asked everyone in the family to do their utmost to persuade Reb Noson to return to the business world. They argued with him that having been supported by his father for some 7 years, it was time for him to earn a living for himself. They agreed that his learning and prayers were important and suggested a compromise whereby he would operate a fabric store in Nemirov, which Esther Shendel would manage entirely on her own. This would leave Reb Noson free to study and pray the whole day. All he would have to do would be to travel to Berdichev occasionally in order to buy merchandise. True, he would have to give up a few days for these trips, but he would be free to study for the rest of the time. However, Reb Noson spent nearly every moment either praying or learning, and it was therefore very difficult for his family even to discuss the idea with him. At home, he never had time. He ate his meals as quickly as possible and then hurried straight back to the Beis Medrash in order to continue studying. Eventually, the family sent Reb Noson's uncle to the Beis Medrash to speak to him there, while Esther Shendel sent his brother-in-law. The latter visited him fairly often. Reb Noson once said to him, "You're right, but what can I do? The time will come when we'll be laid out on the floor with our feet to the door." The unremitting pressure had its effect on Reb Noson. The Talmud relates that Rabbi Shmuel was a trader and would work for a few hours a day, while Reb Shimon Bar Yochai abstained from all work and spent his entire day immersed in his studies. Our sages taught, many tried to follow Rabbi Shmuel and succeeded. Many tried to follow Rabbi Shimon and failed. Reb Noson sat pondering. Perhaps he was supposed to go out and trade. This is also considered service of God. Maybe he should run a business and study part-time. On the other hand, he could not forget the short span of man's life. Every hour, every minute, every second spent on the material is lost, never to return. How could he sacrifice the spiritual for the material? After many debates, Reb Noson finally saw that he had little choice. He made an agreement whereby he would be the purchasing agent for the store, on condition that his family would make all the necessary arrangements for his trips, such as hiring the wagon and driver and preparing his needs for the journey. Even then, he made the agreement with much reluctance and bitterness. When the day came for Reb Noson to travel to Berdichev, he decided to visit the Rebbe in Breslov first. His departure for Berdichev was set for the late afternoon. He thought that if he went to Breslov early enough, he would have sufficient time to speak to the Rebbe and get back home well in time. His desire to see the Rebbe was so great that not finding a wagon immediately, he set off on foot. Eventually, a wagon passed by and picked him up and took him to Breslov. The Rebbe took Reb Noson for a long walk, after which they sat down by the side of a brook, where the Rebbe taught a lesson explaining the significance of hisbodedus as the key to bringing ourselves nearer to God. The lesson teaches that one should go out to the fields at night, after midnight, when everyone is asleep, and there pour out one's heart to God, working step by step to cleanse oneself of material desires and refine one's traits, one after the other. After first learning about hisbodedus from the Rebbe at Rosh Hashanah time, Reb Noson had already discovered for himself the value of going out alone in the small hours. When he now heard the Rebbe weave all the ideas together in one striking lesson, he became so impassioned that he wanted to spread this teaching throughout the entire world. He said, "I'll run through the streets and the market crying, 'What are you all thinking about? What about your souls?'" The Rebbe literally had to grab Reb Noson by his clothes to restrain him. "Stop," he said, "they won't listen to you." Reb Noson then left for his trip to Berdichev. As soon as he returned home with the merchandise, without even taking the time to give his wife the prices of the various cloths, he ran straight to the Beis Medrash and threw himself into his studies again. But Esther Shendel was a young mother with little enough knowledge of how to manage a store, let alone how to price merchandise. Whenever a customer came in to buy something, she had to run to the Beis Medrash to ask Reb Noson how much to charge. His family realized that this was no way to run a business, and they found someone else to purchase the merchandise. Esther Shendel remained in the store, but it made very little profit, and in the meantime, Reb Naftali Hertz's own business had begun to fail, reducing his ability to help his son and daughter-in-law. Esther Shendel, who had been used to a comfortable life, first in her parents' home and then in that of her in-laws, saw how their income was dwindling and began to add her own arguments to those of Reb Noson's family about the need to earn a living. Once, she so embittered Reb Noson that he went into another room and sat down with a heavy heart, saying, "God, much time must pass before a person can become a pious Jew. For the time being, give me an income." The verse says, "Before you even call, I will answer." A little while before that incident, Reb Naftali Hertz's partners met with him and spoke to him about Reb Noson's situation. They argued that Reb Noson was an exceptional prodigy. How could a father turn his back on such a precious child? Reb Naftali Hertz defended himself by saying that he had supported Reb Noson for many years. With dwindling profits, how much longer was he supposed to do so? Especially since he also had other younger children that needed help. The partners suggested that they take the remaining merchandise from Reb Noson's store, appraise it, and add it to the inventory of their Odessa store. Reb Noson would share in any profits, with his father giving him a little extra on the side. This would provide Reb Noson with a respectable income without his being a burden on his family. Reb Naftali Hertz agreed, and Reb Noson was able to support his family from this income for about 15 years. In the course of the summer, Rebbe Nachman went to visit his uncle Reb Baruch, who was staying in Tolchin. Reb Noson also wanted to go, but the Rebbe said no. Reb Noson pressed him, but the Rebbe said, "It won't be good for you to see me this way." And Reb Noson understood that it was better that he should not go. As things turned out, during the Rebbe's visit, disagreements broke out between nephew and uncle, and from then on, Reb Baruch started opposing Rebbe Nachman. The Rebbe sensed that this was impending and obviously did not want Reb Noson to be there to see it. The Shabbos that the Rebbe was away in Tolchin, Reb Yudel was in Breslov. Reb Noson had also stayed there and spent Shabbos with him. Reb Yudel had with him manuscripts of Rebbe Nachman's teachings from the years prior to Reb Noson's attachment to him. Reb Noson spent almost the entire Shabbos studying these teachings, carrying on well into the following night. As the night went on, he realized that the Rebbe would be returning later on and that he himself would have to return home to Nemirov. One of the Rebbe's directives to him had been that twice in his lifetime he should remain awake for 2 days and 1 night, and Reb Noson decided he should make this one of those occasions. That same summer, Reb Noson was once eating with the Rebbe, who began insulting him, saying, "What an important young man, son-in-law of the great Reb David Tzvi Orbach and son to Reb Naftali Hertz." Reb Noson continued eating. The Rebbe turned to him and said, "When someone is insulted, he carries on eating?" Reb Noson still continued eating. The Rebbe then said, "I tell you now, stop eating." And Reb Noson stopped. The Rebbe was testing Reb Noson to see if he could bear embarrassment. The Rebbe then left on a journey. On his return, he again showed a kind face to Reb Noson, who wrote that the Rebbe treats him as a father who punishes his son only because he delights in him. With Rosh Hashanah of 1803 approaching, Reb Noson was coming towards the end of his first year with the Rebbe. Perhaps the most important of his many gains was that he now felt he had hope. His devotions had a new meaning. He was practicing his spodidus. His concentration during prayers had improved. He was more productive in his studies. He had begun writing down the Rebbe's lessons, and he had made a start at transcribing the Rebbe's Aleph-Bet book, otherwise known as Sefer Hamiddos. But he faced many obstacles. His wife, his father, his family, and his in-laws were all opposed to what he was doing. His every trip to the Rebbe, his every fervent prayer, even his simplest devotions, such as studying 18 chapters of Mishnah daily, were all bought only at the cost of great pain and the hostility of those around him. Reb Noson writes, "I don't know where I got the strength to stand up to all those obstacles. They were almost impossible to bear. But stand up he did. He was well aware of the duties a man has towards his family, especially those of a new father. This is clear from his later writings. He knew that he might easily be accused of shirking his immediate financial obligations. Not one of his decisions came easily. But he had a larger picture of life, where every single moment is fleeting and must be used to the full in pursuit of the eternal rather than being squandered on the transient. He felt that his responsibility to life itself had to come before all others. Regardless of the cost, he went to visit the Rebbe every time he felt the need. He could not hold back from drinking in the sweet words of Torah that alone had the power to quench the thirst of his heart."